Hello everyone, and today I'm going to tell you a story. Enjoy your viewing. The forest near Lockwood was known for its silence. People said the trees grew too thick, blocking the sun and leaving the underbrush in eternal shadow. It was a place where no birds sang, no insects buzzed, and where even the wind had no voice. It was a place where children dared not venture, and the locals avoided it like a plague. Yet, every year, when autumn painted the landscape in reds and oranges, some foolish soul ventured in, and none ever returned the same. They'd return with hollow eyes, mouths half open, as if speaking words they couldn't quite remember, lost in a fog of terror. It all started one crisp evening when a group of 3 girls, out of boredom and arrogance, decided to prove that the stories were nothing more than small-town gossip. Lily, a confident and outspoken blonde. Sarah, the quiet, shy one who always felt out of place. And Emma, the ever-curious daredevil. They were inseparable, and on that particular day, as they sat by the edge of the woods, Emma spoke of the legend with a gleam of excitement in her eyes. "You know," Emma whispered, leaning in, "they say there's a creature in there, the kind of thing that only comes out when it's hungry. They say it only feeds on girls." Lily laughed, her voice echoing through the air like a sudden crack of thunder. "Come on, Emma. You don't believe that nonsense, do you? It's just an old story to keep kids out of the woods." But Sarah wasn't laughing. She felt a shiver run down her spine as she stared at the darkening trees. "I don't know. I don't think we should go in." Emma, always the brave one, shot her a mischievous grin. "You're not scared, are you?" "No," Sarah muttered. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. The wind whispered among the leaves, as though speaking in a language she couldn't understand. The decision was made in the space of a heartbeat, and despite Sarah's lingering doubts, they walked into the forest, each step heavier than the last. The deeper they went, the more the air seemed to thicken, as though the forest itself was breathing. Lily was the first to stop and point at a twisted tree. "What's that?" she asked, her voice high with apprehension. There, hanging from the gnarled branches, were old tattered clothes, dark, torn rags fluttering in the wind like the remnants of something long forgotten. Emma approached it, her curiosity piqued. "It's nothing. Probably just stuff left behind by other people who came here." But Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. Something felt wrong. The trees seemed to lean closer, their branches reaching for them like skeletal arms. The silence enveloped them, thick and suffocating. The further they ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became, until even the air seemed heavier, thicker with an unseen weight. Then came the first sign, a low, guttural sound, almost like a laugh, echoed from deeper within the forest. "Did you hear that?" Sarah's voice quivered, but neither Emma nor Lily seemed to notice. They were too caught up in the thrill of adventure. Sarah's feet faltered. She wanted to turn back, but something compelled her to follow them, even as the sound grew louder, more distinct. The creature, whatever it was, seemed to be playing with them. It mocked their every step, every movement. The laughter, harsh and shrill, now circled them, as if it were coming from all directions. It was everywhere, seeping into their minds, twisting their thoughts. Suddenly, Emma stopped. Her eyes widened, locked onto something just ahead. "Did you see that?" she whispered, voice trembling with excitement. A shadow moved between the trees, fast, too fast for any normal creature. Lily scoffed, stepping forward. "It's just a deer, calm down." But Sarah wasn't so sure. The shadow had been too quick, too deliberate. And then a voice, soft and distant, like a breath in the wind, whispered her name. Sarah. Her name. It was her voice, but it wasn't her voice. It came from somewhere deep within the forest, chilling her to the bone. "Stop messing around, Emma," Sarah called, but her voice wavered. The laughter rose again, more frenzied this time. They pressed on, but Sarah felt herself lagging behind. Something was pulling her back, like invisible hands clenching around her ankles. "Sarah, wait up!" Lily shouted, but Sarah couldn't move. And then it appeared. The creature stood just ahead, shrouded in darkness, its form indistinct. Its body was tall, impossibly thin, with long arms that hung down to the ground like broken branches. Its face was hidden in shadow, but there was something about its presence that froze Sarah's blood in her veins. It was watching them. No, it was watching her. Lily and Emma were laughing now, but their voices sounded off, too hollow, too echoey. Sarah's heart raced. Guys, stop. We need to go back now. But they couldn't hear her, or they didn't want to. The creature's eyes gleamed red as it tilted its head, a mockery of curiosity. Sarah wanted to scream, but her throat had gone dry, her limbs frozen. It took a step forward, and the ground beneath them seemed to crack and groan. The air grew colder, suffocating. Then the voice again, but this time it was a whisper in her ear. Run, Sarah. It was her own voice. She looked over at Emma and Lily, but they were already walking toward it, as if in a trance. Their faces were pale, their eyes glassy. They weren't themselves. They couldn't be. This thing, it was controlling them. Suddenly, everything fell silent again. The creature's form shifted, contorting as it stepped closer to Emma, who was too far gone to resist. The last thing Sarah saw before the shadows consumed her was the creature's face. Hollow, empty, but full of hunger. This hunger. And then, everything went black. In the hours that followed, a search was launched. It was a frantic attempt by the townsfolk, their faces drawn with dread as they combed through the woods. They found nothing, not a trace, not a sign of the girls, except for their shoes, discarded in a clearing, as if they had never been worn. The forest seemed to reject their efforts to find anything, and soon the search was called off. The only conclusion was that the forest had claimed them. But some said, on quiet nights, if you listened carefully, you could hear laughter, just the faintest echo, as if mocking you for daring to enter. But no one ever spoke of it again, because the forest wasn't done yet. Months passed, and the memory of the three girls faded from the minds of most. People spoke of the event in hushed whispers, but no one dared venture back into the woods, and the town of Lockwood returned to its slow, unremarkable life. The trees stood, ominous and silent as ever, but the town's pulse continued, unaware that something darker still lingered just beyond its borders. Yet some didn't forget. Sarah's older sister, Jessica, was one of the few who couldn't move on. She refused to accept that her sister was gone, swallowed whole by the forest without so much as a trace. Sarah's mother had fallen into a deep sorrow, but Jessica's grief turned into obsession. She spent nights researching the town's history, digging into every old legend, every mysterious disappearance. She learned about the creature, the Wraith of Hunger, they called it, a being of shadow, one who was cursed to feed on the souls of young girls, mocking them before devouring them completely. The more she learned, the more certain Jessica became that Sarah's fate was not a random tragedy. No, it was part of a cycle, a curse that had been continuing for centuries, and she would be the one to end it. One cold November evening, Jessica ventured into the forest alone. Armed with only a flashlight and her relentless will, she stepped over the threshold of darkness, her feet crunching on the fallen leaves. The same unease that had plagued Sarah months earlier gripped her, but she pushed forward, determined. The first sign that something was terribly wrong came almost immediately. The air was colder here, unnaturally so, as though the forest itself had absorbed a chill too deep to escape. The wind was still, the trees looming like silent sentinels. But the silence, it wasn't comforting. It was oppressive, as though the forest was holding its breath, waiting. Jessica had barely walked for 20 minutes when she heard it. The soft, mocking voice. At first, she thought it was just her mind playing tricks on her. But then it called her name, clear as day. Jessica! Her pulse quickened. She whipped around, searching for the source. But the only thing she could see were the shifting shadows between the trees. It was getting harder to see. The flashlight flickered, sputtering for a moment before it caught the light again. But now she could feel it, the eyes on her. Something was watching her from the dark. Her heart hammered in her chest as she gripped the flashlight tighter, the beam trembling in her hand. "I'm not afraid of you," she muttered to herself, trying to convince herself that she wasn't scared. Then came the laughter. Low, hollow. A mocking sound that echoed from all directions. Not a laugh, but a sneer, as though the very air around her was dripping with malice. You shouldn't have come, Jessica, it hissed. You shouldn't have come back. Jessica froze. The voice was familiar, too familiar. It was Sarah's voice, but warped, distorted, filled with something wrong. Sarah? Her voice cracked as she called into the darkness. Sarah, where are you? The laughter returned, louder this time, cutting through the silence like a knife. The beam of her flashlight flickered once again and, for a moment, she saw something. Just a glimpse, deep in the shadows. A figure, tall, thin, with long, gnarled arms. Its face was covered in shadow, but the red gleam of its eyes glowed like embers in the dark. It was watching her. It wasn't Sarah. Before she could react, the ground beneath her feet seemed to tremble, and the trees seemed to sway as if alive, twisting and contorting in unnatural ways. Her breath hitched in her throat as the air grew colder, choking the very life out of her. Come to me, Jessica, the voice whispered, its tone sickeningly sweet. Come closer. It's your turn now. Jessica's legs refused to move. She could only watch, paralyzed by the nightmare before her. The creature took a step forward, its form flickering like a shadow stretching in the light of her dying flashlight. Its eyes gleamed with hunger, but not for food. No, it was worse than that. It wanted her soul. Help me? Jessica whispered. But the words felt so small, so fragile, against the overwhelming weight of the thing that loomed before her. And then it laughed again. This time the laughter was different. It was mocking, cruel, and full of delight. She turned and ran. Her legs screamed in protest, but fear drove her forward, pushing her through the thick underbrush. The woods seemed to shift around her, the trees narrowing, the shadows growing deeper. No matter how fast she ran, she couldn't escape the feeling that something was gaining on her. The creature's voice followed her, taunting her, calling her name in a chorus of whispers. The sound seemed to surround her, echoing in her mind, rattling her sanity. It mocked her every step, telling her how futile it was to try to escape. Jessica, there's nowhere to run, it hissed. I always find you. I always find you. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet gave way, and Jessica tumbled down, crashing into a hidden pit. She landed with a sickening thud, her body bruised and battered. She tried to rise, but her limbs wouldn't obey. The darkness around her pressed in, and for the first time, she realized she wasn't alone. Above her, a figure loomed, a silhouette in the darkness. The creature crouched, its long arms reaching down to her, pulling her from the pit. As it lifted her, Jessica saw its face fully for the first time. It was empty, a hollow, gaping void where a face should have been. A black void that sucked the light from the world, leaving only the glowing red eyes that glared into her very soul. And then it spoke, the voice now no longer mocking, but filled with cold finality. Now, Jessica, it's your turn. With a sickening twist, it opened its mouth wide, far too wide, revealing rows of jagged, glistening teeth. And in the blink of an eye, it devoured her whole. The next day, the search teams arrived once again. The woods were combed from every direction. They found the pit where Jessica had fallen, but there was no sign of her, no trace of her. The only thing that remained was the sound of her name, faintly whispered by the wind, carried away by the trees that never told their secrets. And once again, the woods fell silent, waiting for the next poor soul to wander in, unaware that it was never truly over, because the Wraith of Hunger was always hungry, and it would never stop feeding. See you in the next video. Don't forget to support me.